Welcome to The Crusty Fox, and we're on to Season 1, Episode 3 of Sex and the City. Buckle up kids, this one's called Bay of Married Pigs, so you know we're in for a treat. We're also going to start tracking the rules of Carrie. Last time we covered off 3 of them. Rule 1, nobody should be friends with Carrie. Rule 2, because the only woman Carrie ever really shows up for is Carrie. And Rule 3, because the only person Carrie truly does favours for is Carrie. Carrie begins this episode by escaping to the Hamptons for the weekend, courtesy of her friend Patience. Carrie caveats their friendship with the admission that if Patience and husband Peter didn't own a house by the beach, she'd hate them. Because, as we all know by now, unless Carrie wants something from you, you can fuck right off. Carrie claims that house guests of hanky-panky starved Hamptons couples are required to pay for their weekends away with tales of their sexploits. In Carrie's world, every marriage comes with a mandatory no-sex clause, unless that sex is being relayed verbally by a columnist who probably knows less about it now than she did when she started having it. Because Carrie is to sexual liberation what a golden retriever is to an accountancy firm. The next morning, Carrie's energy boost comes not from a cup of coffee, but from her fight-or-flight response kicking in when she's confronted by Peter's John Thomas as he waits pantless outside her bedroom door. As she does with most crimes, Carrie treats this as more of a social faux pas than indecent exposure. That said, she does immediately tell Patience, whose frustration suggests she's running out of friends her husband hasn't waved his willy at. Bundled onto a bus to New York and low-key regretting having ruined her weekend away with honesty, Carrie meets up with Charlotte, Miranda and Samantha for lunch. Off-screen, Patience told Carrie that the reason the whole thing upset her so much is something Carrie, as a single woman, couldn't understand. This triggers Miranda, who, as the only single lawyer at her firm, believes that married women see the single as their enemies. Since Miranda reacts to affection with all the warmth of a cornered opossum, there's a good chance that her co-workers consider her the enemy for other reasons. Samantha boldly claims that married women are constantly on guard in case one of those evil single homewreckers swoops in and steals their husbands. Keep that in mind because she later proves exactly why they should be. Charlotte, who thinks of herself as already engaged to a man who has so far managed to successfully hide from her, disagrees. We know by now, of course, that Charlotte thinks about marriage with the same frequency that men think about sex, two very different relationship milestones which can both be successfully accomplished by slipping a ring onto a finger. Sensing an easy route to a week's worth of work, Carrie whips all of this up into an assumed war between the married and the single. As far as extrapolation goes, that's like eating bad chicken once and assuming that all farmers are trying to kill you. Probably because Carrie is paid by the word, not by the brain cell. Then there's some more talking head rubbish. Rather than waste oxygen on it, I'll let you in on a secret. These little interludes are only there to back up whichever loony tangent Carrie is on this week. If she decided that men are literally dogs in pink flesh suits, the interviewees would run around barking and humping each other's legs. Stanford, fresh from a shift posing riddles to travellers crossing bridges, manifests later to offer his opinion. He believes that New York's increasingly coupled-up gay community is ostracising him for the crime of being single. As if by magic, Joe, an old friend of Carrie's, and his husband Lou, who looks like an iguana with a part-time job at a Levi's store, happen to pass by. Joe's one of those people who will aggressively update you on his life as if he's certain you've been talking about him behind his back and needs you to know how well he's doing. He bluntly informs Carrie that he's come out as gay and is happily married, leaving her momentarily thrown because Carrie doesn't get gay men who aren't stereotypes or accessories. When Stanford isn't brought into the conversation within the first 6 words, he interjects, while pulling a face that was made to be shoved into a tank of wasabi. Joe and Lou, after confirming Carrie's singledom, ask her to donate one of her eggs so that they can have a baby. It's clear that Joe hasn't seen Carrie in a long time when he specifies his need for a top-notch donor because, as far as we know, the only thing she's been on top of recently probably ran on batteries. In the spirit of all of her best overblown crusades, Carrie takes this as a new attack on singles. There is literally nothing which Carrie can't twist into her current narrative. A butterfly can flap its wings in Peking, and in Central Park, Carrie is already telling a pretzel vendor that it's a comment on her choice of tampon brand. Because everything is about Carrie, especially when it isn't. Across town, Miranda, the lawyer that fun forgot, is reluctantly attending her firm's annual softball game with a level of negative energy she usually reserves for dating. A good game seemingly results in a promotion, probably leading most of the past MVPs to get disbarred the first time they referred to a judge as brosif. Miranda agreed to allow colleague Jeff to set her up on a blind date for the event, which turns out to be with a woman called Sid. When Miranda reveals his ignorant mistake, Carrie's voiceover labels her as brave, as though the truth will cause Sid to transform into a were-lesbian and start biting chunks out of spectators. When Miranda plays well, I'd guess because she was hoping to crush some testicles with a power slide into home base, the CEO mistakes she and Sid for a couple. He invites them to a dinner party, and with the faint scent of power wafting into her nostrils, she seizes the opportunity and accepts for them both without asking. Elsewhere, Carrie decides to investigate her imaginary Cold War further by interrogating another couple she's friends with, David and Lisa. David and Lisa are objectively fucking awful, so it's no surprise that their pairing is Carrie's favourite. These two are the kind of couple who perform a bland, playful ribbing of each other for everyone else's benefit. Carrie, of course, likes this because they pretend to hate being a couple as much as she hates it for real. Accidentally getting revenge, they invite their friend Sean along to meet Carrie. This annoys her because she wants people to listen quietly to her whinge about being single without having the audacity to help her actually do something about it. Sean signals his openness to marriage almost immediately, which for once Carrie correctly identifies as a red flag. They embark on a series of dates despite her not being particularly interested. It's probably because at this point he seems like a normal, if a little intense, prospect, and of course, Carrie doesn't do relationships that aren't screwed from the start. Later, Carrie drags herself to her unwanted beau's housewarming party. She lures Charlotte there with the prospective bachelors of an equal or greater eligibility to Sean. Samantha was probably already scoping the place out because she gets a downstairs tingle whenever more than a dozen men gather in an enclosed space. Unfortunately for both of them, the party is filled with married couples who the show frames as dowdy losers for the high crime of having their lives together. Sean meets Charlotte and Samantha for the first time and seems able to identify them by how much cleavage they're showing, which raises some interesting questions about how Carrie is describing her supposed friends to other people. Sean wastes no time in showing Carrie and Charlotte his office, which will one day apparently be his kids' room. As if to compound Carrie's horror, he reveals that he's collecting baby paraphernalia. If you listen closely, you can hear Charlotte's ovaries pulsating. While this is going on, Samantha has a tequila-fueled breakdown in the kitchen after realising that she's already been to bed with half of the married men in attendance. After discovering from other guests with some serious boundary issues that Sean has his own business, $300,000 in the bank, and an apparently talented wang, Carrie descends to a fresh circle of hell when Patience and Peter reappear. Because in the 90s, instead of laughing at your friends' crap parties when the photos hit Instagram, you actually had to go and see it for yourself. A wasted Samantha, with perfect timing, stumbles over and reveals that everyone knows about the impromptu morning review staged by Peter's one-eyed milkman. Across town, Miranda, deep into her lesbian cosplay, attends dinner with Sid but eventually admits the truth to her mostly unbothered boss. She does gamely try kissing Sid, but only reaffirms her straightness, in a move that manages to frame sexual orientation as potentially changeable if you're desperate enough. Charlotte takes Samantha back to her place to sleep it off, but doesn't account for her friend's dissatisfaction at attending a party full of untouchable men. This manifests itself in the early hours when she sneaks down to the lobby in her lingerie, retrieves the Irish doorman, and uses him to test the stain resistance of Charlotte's couch. Back at Sean's wife trap, Carrie tries to let him down gently by admitting for the first time that she doesn't know what she wants. And because there's no Skipper this week, Sean decides to pick up the incel slack. He frustratedly moans about not understanding women, who claim to want marriage and children but won't accept his pitiful offers to provide them. Even if Carrie did want to settle down there and then, leaking your desperate loneliness all over your date and then getting angry when they aren't into it is like filling a jar with piss and having a go at them for not drinking it when they're thirsty. To shut him up, Carrie proves that she's learned nothing about meddling in her friends' love lives by passing him off to commitment enthusiast Charlotte. Charlotte eventually breaks it off with him when they disagree over their choice of fine china, which isn't the worst thing she'll ever do, but at least proves that she's as up for a bit of self-sabotage as the rest of them. Wandering the streets at night and pondering the war between marrieds and singles that she made up, Carrie manages to compare the issue to the Irish Troubles. You might not have had Wikipedia in the 90s, Carrie, but you had libraries. Come on. She decides not to spend so much time worrying about it, and rather than do her job by finishing the column, goes to the movies with her friends instead. There's a poster outside of the cinema for 1998's Godzilla, which means this episode manages to cram 2 New York-based shows into 23 minutes. Impressive stuff. And that's it for this instalment. If you had as good a time here as Samantha had aboard the good ship Irish Doorman, drop a like to let me know and a comment with your thoughts. If you'd like to come again, just like Samantha aboard the good ship Irish Doorman, then make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Either way, thanks for watching and join me next time for Valley of the 20-something Guys, where Carrie tries to reclaim her youth by draining someone else's. And remember, if you can't be good, be crusty.